We have three excellent leaders here to share their wisdom on how to go from being a team manager, people leader, to become that strategically thinking business leader whom your organization would rely on to go forward. So they have been there, done that, and they're here today. And they will have a discussion. Through that, you can get some understanding of how they have done it and maybe get some learnings from that. So we have Angela Tucci, who's our own. She's in the ABI Advisory Board, so she's like one of our team members. She is Ali Software, which was acquired by CA. She has built and led teams throughout her career. We have Bobby Grefeld, ready to go in her sparkling green shoes. So Bobby is a Senior Director, Human Resources Business Partner with Walmart e-commerce. She's responsible for multiple groups, for HR and talent strategy, the organization of COO, Sam's Club Online, legal, finance, human resources, and global ethics. That's quite a big list she takes care of. And lovely Joe Campbell. Joe is General Manager, Human Resources for the GTSO organization of ANZ. I've worked with Joe before. She's such a lovely leader to be with. So I'll not keep you guys for long. So we will have the discussion will get started. You can reserve your questions for the end. We'll have a Q&A session at the end for about 10 minutes after the discussion is over. Over to you, ladies.
So I think the first thing might be useful just maybe for each of us to tell a little bit of a short story about ourselves and where we come from. So
I guess I'll go first. So let's see. I started my career actually in physics. I was an optical physicist in the medical device industry. So I absolutely took a right turn to get into software and did that actually through education. I went back to business school in order to find my way to software. But I found my way to software actually on a bike ride. I met somebody on a bike ride who said, you know what, there's this whole thing called software, and I said I didn't know anything about it, and I said I probably wouldn't be very good at it, which I did the girl thing, right? I wouldn't be very good at it. But thankfully somebody figured out that maybe I should give it a whirl anyway. And so my career has been starting a couple of companies as well as you heard, now running a business unit in a large company.
Hello. So I actually started my career out in the banking industry. Decided that after about 5 or 6 years there that I wanted to make a career change, and so ran into somebody I had actually went to school with, and they had an opportunity in human resources. So I took that opportunity and kind of found out that that's where my niche was, and that's what I wanted to go down that career path. So did some HR work for our Federated Department Stores, and I actually then got pregnant with my first child, and I stayed at home for 5 years, and I raised my kids. And so I took that break, and I have been through that process of deciding I wanted to go back to work. And so kind of, I have went through that struggle is real when you've decided to take that break and stay at home with your kids and then going back after you've been off the market for 5 years. So fortunately, I had a network and I was able to get into the door into PayPal eBay, which was enormous, and I'm forever grateful for that opportunity. And so I was able to kind of get my foot back in to the workforce and work my way up from there. And I'd been there for 6 years, and then I came over to Walmart e-commerce about 1.5 years ago.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Well, I started off wanting to be a lawyer, actually, and then decided that that would take far too long, and I was way too anxious to get out and earn a buck. So I was offered a role in financial services in the HR world as personnel, as it was known then, and I've stayed as a career HR professional for pretty much all of my career. So I've worked in various industries, telecommunications and mainly financial services, and I've had the privilege to work with amazing people from around the world. And I'm a New Zealander by birth, but I'm living in Melbourne, and I'm currently working for ANZ Banking Group. So we are one of the big 4 banks in Australia and #1 market share in New Zealand, and we have about 50,000 people working around Asia, with 7,000 of our people working here in Bengaluru. So, and they do fantastic things for our group. So hopefully we can share some things with you today.
So I think we're here as your fan club. That's what is my understanding.
I didn't pay them, I promise.
So I think you were talking a little bit earlier about how does it feel? How does it feel to be a leader?
Yeah. I think the first word that comes to me is privileged, I think. Very privileged to be able to lead a team of people and, everything that goes with that, the serious accountability and, the opportunity to help people grow and develop in their careers. And so that was the first thing that came to me. And the second thing was challenged, I think, really being a business leader, when things are all on your shoulders, it challenges me to be my best. So, I continually feel challenged to get better. And I think the third thing probably would be is proud. And I come from a really small rural community in rural New Zealand, and now I work for a fantastic, respected big bank, and so I feel proud of my role in that company. What about you guys?
Well, I think the notion of privilege, that word really resonates with me as well, because I think it's oftentimes the mindset is it really is a humbling role to have, because you're supposed to be a role model, and I think many leaders oftentimes think it's about them, not about their people, and I think the illustrative of us is more that feeling of humility and being glad to be a role model. I think also leadership is about going first, so there's an element of courage on some days where you don't feel so brave, because there's a lot of pressure that comes at us, but leaders need to go first, and that courageous first step can be scary, but also very rewarding. And then I do think about leadership right now too as being challenging, because the environment's so dynamic.
Yeah, and challenging is a word that jumps out at me right now, especially with the environment that is going on. And we are, our headquarters for the e-commerce business for Walmart is in Silicon Valley. So we are constantly in competition for kind of the top talent, and even when you get them, it's how are we going to retain them? How are we going to develop their careers? What kind of culture do we want to build? And I talked a little bit about this morning, and when culture isn't free lunches and how many ping pong tables we have. It is really about the environment we build for our associates to go and thrive and be their better selves at work every day. And anyone that I speak to, or me personally, all I want to do is go and make an impact every day, right? And I find that I can do that really through being a leader and with my team. And I look at the leaders that have inspired me and mentored me over the years. And, I think all of us can relate to there's two types of leaders, the type of leaders you aspire to be and the type of leaders you don't want to be. And I always am trying to gear towards that aspirational leader. And so it's always just keeping that in mind too, that you are a role model, even on days you don't feel like it, and you have to lead the way. And when things are rough, you do have to kind of put on that face and go forward and just go, we're gonna get through this, don't worry about it, and all the back end stuff, it's your job to go and fight those fights, right? So.
Yeah, I think somebody said to me once, leaders do as they must, not as they feel. And doing as they must means, advocating for, sort of and standing up for the company and what the company believes in. Not necessarily towing the party line all the time, but actually making a stand and making sure that how you are being experienced, is lined up with, what the company says that they stand for. So, yeah.
So I think we've also found that leadership is changing, and maybe the models that we had in the 20th century don't quite map to the 21st century models. I know it's something I think a lot about as to how to inspire. Thoughts on what the environment is actually creating in terms of net new skills we're having to develop.
I think I think agility is, I think, one of the most frequently used words in terms of a developing capability in today's world. I mean, the pace of change, the standards, things that are expected of us, technology, changing customer demands. I mean, that's all just, everybody's on 24/7. So I think the ability to, sense change, understand the customer demands, that, how they're changing, where they're changing, what does that look like, course correct if you need to, and really kind of sense that and adapt your style and your mindset and the solutions that you're delivering to customers in line with that is something that is a real capability that is important for leaders to develop, I think. Yeah.
I would touch on the topic that we're all here to talk about, right? It is being strategic too. I mean, it sounds like something that you would expect in all leaders, but not all leaders really can have that skill. So it's being strategic. And then as you were talking about that, what popped into my mind is being able to lead through ambiguity. So I find that when we're looking, and even from an HR perspective, right, assessing potential in people and identifying the high potential, that's a question that we're always looking at. And can you be okay with ambiguity? Comfortable with that, and you have to make your team comfortable with that. And a lot of times it's okay to say, we're still working through it, or we don't know what's going to happen, but let's control what we can control. And let's make the impact where we can make the impact.
Yeah, I think our chief executive actually tells a story about ambiguity and becoming comfortable with ambiguity, and he talks about the difference between playing in an orchestra, right, where you play to a piece of music and everybody's got their instrument, and you take the direction of a conductor and you come in when you're supposed to come in and everybody plays in harmony, and it's not like that anymore. And he describes it more about playing improv jazz, so, where you don't kind of know where this piece of music's going to go to, but you need to be sensing the beat and sensing the tone and kind of listening to others about where you need to come in. Various people take the lead, and, that's sort of a nice analogy around dealing with ambiguity. So, yeah, getting comfortable with playing improv jazz is what we talk about.
And there's, no such thing as a perfect plan.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes we try to, spend all our time getting, on planning to perfection, and we miss the opportunity. So, that dynamism that's happening in the market, one of the things I've observed is just how few leaders are actually really empowering people versus telling people. And I use the example of, I like The Fifth Discipline. It's a book by Peter Senge, the model of telling, selling, testing, consulting, and co-creating. And sort of you devolve sometimes into telling. And how many of you, when you tell your children, do something, do they not do it? And yet we go to work sometimes and we try to tell people what to do. And when we're open to asking the best of, crowdsourcing the best ideas, we get such better outcomes. And it's that co-creation process that's really neat. But oftentimes insecure leaders just want to act important and they tell. I'm sure you probably see that in some of your younger managers that you coach.
Yeah, and I think that the important piece around there is any leader who really wants to personally then go make an impact tends to stay away from that, because you don't have time to go, and it just makes your life and your job more difficult if I have to then be the person who is giving direction and having them just be going and executing. Like, that is not why I've hired these people.
Yeah, they stop thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
If I see one more template, I'm going to scream, right? Because it's that notion of fill in the blanks, and we're not a fill in the blanks, set of talent, right? We're thinkers, we're creative, we want critical thinking from our people, and we tell them they shut down.
Yeah. I think you can't empower people. You can't give empowerment. Empowerment has to be pulled, it has to be taken, it has to be discovered by people themselves, I think. And that takes courage. and it also, you can create that empowerment by seeking to understand, being curious, asking questions. But I think as a leader, the notion of empowering others or giving empowerment, I don't actually think that that's very valid.
Well, and as you said that too, what comes to mind is how do you create safe environments? Because many times we don't realize that we're making it unsafe. And that's another way in which people end up shutting down when we start to create a bunch of rules around things and then say, oh, by the way, innovate.
Yeah.
Like you can create innovation by demand.
And don't screw up.
And there'll be
And do it fast.
repercussions.
Yeah.
Oh, and do it fast. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have thought about more of that safety notion and building trust. I mean, that's foundationally of any relationship, and especially when you're building relationships. Even if you've got 1,000 people in your organization, or you have 5, the way you show up as a leader is really illustrating that you can be vulnerable, and that's the way you build trust. Creating that personal connection for people. And so oftentimes, like I said, the leaders go first in that vulnerability. And I don't know if you have any examples of that, that moment where actually you felt that you had that courageous moment of sharing something that you didn't really want to share, but yet at that moment was when you actually got the greatest affinity and response from people. Has that happened or in your career? It's not on our script, so this could be really kind of scary and courageous and vulnerable for us.
Right now, this second, because I don't have an answer.
I think that, that disclosing, sort of what you're fearful of, and sometimes fear of failure, and, being okay to share sometimes where, you didn't quite pull it off the way you had intended.
Are you not perfect?
Definitely not.
Yeah. Anybody here perfect? No.
I think choosing to disclose, personal stuff about yourself is a really powerful thing as a leader, and it does take guts and courage. But I think it can be really powerful in connecting and relating to others and allowing us all to be human, acknowledging each other's humanness. I think it's one of the most powerful things that connects leaders and teams together.
I think that for me, it's been opportunities where problem solving and being able to bring my team in to help problem solve something that has been given to me at a higher level, right? That it's not just me who's going to come up with the solution to this or what the plan is or the go forward, but bringing them into that fold of, okay, I need help. Like, I can't come up with the answer all by myself. So this is where I hired all of, we brought you in because you are subject matter experts in these particular situations, so I need to leverage that. And so I need help, and this is how I need your input on how we're going to go about that. So I feel that, actually, and in the past, when leaders have done that for me and brought me in to kind of problem solve, that definitely builds that basis of connection and trust, and it's really just team building too, where you're like, all right, we did this as a team, we got the solution, Yeah,
I mean, I love the notion of teams. I played a lot of sports, and I think I'm always trying to recreate those moments on the sports field. But you could be in a ballet, or part of a dance squad, or part of a band, and that sense of team. One of the things we do is a quarterly planning where we steer the business, and we bring 100 of our people together and say, I don't know, here's a set of priorities that we think are the right priorities. Here are the goals we're trying to get to. What are your ideas about how to get there? Because I don't want to be prescriptive, because then I'm back into a telling, but I do want to mine or source. And when in that room, we also oftentimes will bring our customers, which is the scariest moment, right? Because you're basically showing those, I call it the pink tummy moments, where you're really vulnerable, of illustrating kind of your dirty laundry in front of your customers. And it's at that moment that actually we build more customer affinity and loyalty by being human and imperfect than by trying to show some, again, perfect plan.
I think one of the themes of the session was around sort of our thinking about, you know, the process of becoming more of a strategic leader and sort of what the process might be around that. You know, sort of share any ideas around that or your journey or?
I don't, you know, if I sit back and map, I don't think I can go, okay, this is the process. I'm going to get up today. I'm going to put on my green shoes and I'm going to go, you know.
You look nice.
Strategic. Yeah. I just want everyone to look at my shoes again. Just kidding. I want to, I feel that what I've learned from some, you know, I've been very fortunate that my last few bosses have been amazing and they've been very instrumental in developing me and mentoring me and getting me and helping me get to where I am today. And that's something that I truly recognize, that I am where I am today because of the investment and guidance and mentorship of other people who were, you know, I was blessed enough that they stopped and took an interest in me. One of my past executives that I adored, the one thing that she drilled into my head from an HR perspective is, you are an HR business partner, and remember the business aspect of that. So you know your business. You know the business better than the client that you are supporting. That is your goal here. And when you are able to actually sit at a table and talk about the business in a very real way and talk about it with a lens of, you can have that HR strategic lens, but not, you're not only a subject matter expert, right? You're not the HR subject matter expert, but you can bring leverage to the table regarding the business and the outcomes and how are we going to get and drive to these objectives. So for me, when we talk about being strategic, that has got to be a fundamental for me and for anybody that I see within that role.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense of the business context and being highly credible. And you know, I think about part of the reason for moving for physics into business was I didn't understand the system of business. I wanted to see the bigger picture, and so I knew that I needed training to get there. That I wanted to get there as fast as possible, so I wanted to be immersed in training. But then I also wanted to think more broadly. So sometimes people ask, like, what do I read? And I'm going to show how dated I am in what I read. Like, I read Vanity Fair. I confess, it's on my iPad, and it's a way for sourcing ideas and sort of cleansing the mind to actually be able to see the bigger picture and not get so narrow and focus to the point that I miss the creativity that could come from other places that I don't even expect. So there's been a combination of really, you know, the training-based pieces of it, but I think somebody mentioned earlier, kind of the curiosity and continuing to have curiosity on a broader scale, and then to bring those ideas back into the organization in all different ways.
Yeah. I think that breadth of perspective and sort of continually developing, you know, your perspective as deep but more so broad is a really, really important aspect of becoming more strategic. You know, it sort of starts with yourself being, you know, open to different ideas, different perspective, different points of view, putting yourself in the customer's shoes, you know, being across, you know, different trends and issues in your industries, you know, looking across geographical boundaries, industry boundaries, you know, looking outside the sort of narrowness of your role and really sort of integrating all of the diverse perspectives. And I think the more breadth that you can build from a perspective, then I think that's a bit of that's a key capability or a key competency, I think, in becoming more strategic.
I think something popped into my head as you were speaking to. For me, it's also going to be being able to synthesize and simplify the complex, right? Because we can make everything and anything more complex than it absolutely needs to be. So if you are able to be that person in the room that can kind of cut through all of it and get to, okay, what is the core problem we're trying to solve? What is the root problem we're trying to solve here? Or what is the question we're asking ourselves here? And being able to cut through that and be able to synthesize that, that is something that will get you far in this world, because there isn't enough of it. And I'm sure all of us can think of meetings that could have been done via an email or a phone call, or you walk out and you're like, I don't even know what's going on here. And so being able to drive that of just going, okay, let's simplify this and let's get to the root. And what are we trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, lots of status and activity and how.
Yes.
And we go into those rat holes. So let me tell you how we're going to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And there's that quintessential moment where somebody's like, why are we doing this? What's the point? And bringing it back up to a level that is really tangible, and then you can reframe the conversation.
And don't be afraid to offer solutions. So there is a lot of like, we're gonna look at the problem, we're gonna walk around it, we're gonna talk about it.
We're going to admire it.
Have another meeting about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe we'll go and talk about, and then we're gonna schedule follow-up meetings some more. And it's just like, don't be afraid to offer a solution. Like, don't be afraid to raise your hand and go, why don't we just do this?
Yeah.
Or this?
Yeah, look, I think, good, because you've got, a strategy is it's just a set of ideas, right? If you don't have an action plan or an execution plan, or if you're not actually focused on what you need to do to pull it off. But I agree, though, so often we jump to the what and the how, and we don't spend enough time on the why. And that's sometimes where we lose people from a strategic perspective, but if we spend time on the rationale and the context and, why is this important for us, then you create that kind of connection. And to your point, simplification, I mean, we are masters of making everything complex in our business. And so simplification is always a challenge for us. And so I think strategy on a page, I think, is one of the niftiest tools going around. If you can articulate your strategy and tell a story about it, and maybe just use a page to be able to do that, I think that is even more compelling.
I think that was also along the lines of the story. Don't underestimate the power of storytelling. I think oftentimes we show up as leaders too, and we say, here's the P&L and we need to grow. We need to grow 20%. Get on with it. And that's one, not terribly inspirational. And it's also not really connecting people then to the work that needs to be done. The 20% growth is a byproduct. It's a byproduct of the journey you want the company to go on, or your team, or your organization. And you're trying to paint a path of where's the destination, and going back to the empowering people. Let your teams then figure out and give you ideas as to how to get there. And then illustrate again the why it's important. Oftentimes we just get so mired in metrics that we lose the connection to humanity. Was there a moment, by the way, I kind of heard almost a moment of leadership, like that moment you knew you were the leader in the room, or you're the leader in life, or you were leading? Was there that moment you felt? I know that's on one of our script questions.
Yeah. We're like, what?
Doesn't mean we're ready for it. It just means it's one of the script questions.
It was funny when we had a pre-call to kind of talk through this, and that question came up, and I stopped and I had to think about in my past life, okay, where was that moment where I felt that? And it was a few years back, and it was when I was an HR business partner supporting the finance and data analytics for a large company in Silicon Valley. And I was at the table of the CFO of the company and his direct staff. So he's the CFO, it was all the SVPs. I was driving one of his initiatives for him. And so I was coming in and we were having this conversation and building, and I remember this distinctly. I just sat in the room. I was the only woman at the table. So I was sitting at this table and I looked around the room and I just had that moment of, I went, okay, like they're all looking at me and they're listening to me and they want to know what my thoughts are, and we're having these conversations, and I'm talking them through a thought process. And so for me, that was kind of a moment that crystallized where I went, all right, I'm not doing too bad. I'm all right. Okay. So.
Yeah, good one. I was reflecting on that question as well, and I actually sort of found it quite difficult because it's sort of, it was a, not a reflection I'd kind of thought about before. Maybe I'm still waiting for it.
Your fan club, I think, will help you.
But I think it was sort of the point at which I was a functional leader, so I was leading the HR function, but that I also became a member of the top team, the top leadership team in an organisation. So, that was the opportunity to be involved in discussions, in decisions, that were outside, my sort of specialist area of expertise. And so, when you get to the point where you actually pick up the pen and engage on questions and issues and robust debates, they're actually not about HR. I think that was kind of it for me. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? So when I talked about my story, I wanted to just clarify, I wasn't leading a team at the time. I was an IC. So you don't have to have a team to be seen as a leader in your company. And that's a point that I want to stress to everybody. You don't have to have a team. You don't have to manage people to be seen as a leader in your company.
Title doesn't make you a leader. Yeah, that's, and oftentimes we want a title and then we wonder why people won't follow us. Right?
Yeah. And I also think too that this notion of being strategic, is you don't have to be senior either to be strategic, right? Anyone can demonstrate strategic thinking, strategic decision making, strategic choices. It comes from that thoughtfulness and the curiosity and asking of the questions and the breadth of perspective. Anyone can be strategic.
That's how you become senior, is because we're all watching you, right? And that's one of the things we're looking for is, are you strategic? Are you able to take it to the next level?
And that's initiative too, right? So we look for that curiosity, we look for initiative. It goes back to your comments about, bring a solution. Leaders love when somebody else solves the problem, because it's starting to illustrate that you're also creating the bench strength that says there's somebody to replace you. The best leaders already have a succession plan in place, that they know that they don't need to be there and things will move on. If the leader leaves and everything crumbles, that's not great leadership. So I think it's that notion of bringing ideas, bringing strategies, plans, solutions, and I want to be careful. I was actually a chief strategy officer in 2 different companies, and I oftentimes said that strategy means everything and nothing simultaneously. It's a fancy word for I'm going to say something important, right? When somebody says this is strategic, everybody should pause, right? And I think you're crystallizing that it's really about bringing plans and solutions, and it's a bit of that long-term thinking of knowing where you're going, but again, being open to realizing that, especially in a world that's changing rapidly, sensing what needs to change and being and steering as that comes. Yeah. So be careful that strategic is not a catch-all for important. Yeah, exactly. Or it's really thinking more long-term and being open to possibility of how to shift in time too.
So what was your moment?
So I'd given a talk at a prior company to a group of women. I've been with ABI for a while, and so it's always been a passion to sit down with different women and have a conversation like this. And we were talking about a topic of really women having a voice and really owning their destiny, that really sovereign over self was kind of the concept. And I think it was in Singapore. And about 6 months later, I was at our company's customer event, and a young lady who had been at that event came up to me and said, based on your talk, I ended up moving to Canada and taking this job clear across the world because I was so inspired. And that can sound like a bragging moment, but probably to these ladies here and many of you, I went, oh my God, I've changed somebody's life. And I hope I've been really responsible and thoughtful in doing so. But also, wow, going back to the role modeling, like, bring it each day because you are impacting lives and you can impact them really positively. And that was, again, a scary moment and then this wonderful moment simultaneously.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we were talking about in our pre-conference call as well was sort of, you know, what are some of the qualities and characteristics inherently that women have that, you know, enable them to be fantastic strategic thinkers and contributors? What do you think about that?
I was going to say, I think by nature, clearly it's that tendency to be a little more collaborative, right? And bringing in other points of view, not just, okay, this is my idea, this is my plan, this is how we're going to execute, let's go, right? I have the answer, and let's just get this done and moving quickly. I think it's taking that opportunity to actually stop and think and go, all right, let's bring in a few other people, and just there is a natural tendency, I believe, to be a little bit more collaborative that I think helps in that aspect.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that it's also a little bit more thinking holistically and as maybe along the collaboration that you do want to bring along that entire team. So you're thinking about all the moving parts. Sometimes I say that, you know, there's certain people are serial processors and some people are parallel processors. I often think we're sometimes very good at the parallel processing.
Yeah. I think also too, there are many different roles that women play, you know, sort of in their personal life as well as their professional life that we, you know, perhaps don't always give enough credit to. But if you stop and think about, you know, roles we play as mothers and in the community and as, you know, sort of teachers, you know, we have skills and capabilities that enable, you know, sort of us to be more strategic, be more holistic, be more future-oriented, be more agile, be more adaptive. So, yeah.
Do we want to get these ladies set up to ask us some questions? Give them a 2-minute warning?
Good idea.
Oh, wow, that flew.
While we talk about another topic, but I want to make sure that we open it up for you folks. So
Yeah.
be thinking about your questions.
Yeah. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
As a leader, I mean, you grew up your career, and there are things that you actually learn throughout your career. How do you actually take time, time to actually learn and unlearn? How do you do, you know, how do you absorb things from externally? There are things that you learned. So how do you learn and unlearn?
So I have learned for me over the last few years, and this is something that I try to stress to other people too, is you have to take that opportunity. So one thing we haven't talked about, but that it's, you know, it's a big conversation and topic, is that work-life balance piece, right? I tend to be a believer of the side of that we control that. So, you know, a lot of companies that I've worked for, like, they kind of drive that, and I'm very fortunate, like, I work at a company now where the work-life balance, they really understand it, and it is a big piece of the culture, and I love it so much. Like, I don't think I could go back to the world where I was. It was insane. But it was taking that responsibility on myself to dedicate that time. And you feel selfish doing it, you know, with work, and if you have children, or, you know, if you have a spouse or a partner, but it almost feels selfish, but you have to be selfish. And I want to stress that to people, like, you have to be selfish with your time, and it's okay to say no, because that gives you the opportunity to go and to invest in yourself. And you're not going to be able to do that if you don't have the time. And don't be afraid to say no. Like, I think it's, for me, something that has served me well is I don't shy away from saying no if I don't feel it's the right choice, or if I don't feel it's the right use of my time. don't be afraid to do that, because then you in turn take that time and invest it in yourself, in learnings, in, you know, reflection, in however you feel the time is going to be valuable.
Every time you say yes, you're saying no to something else inherently. So we don't like to say no, but by saying yes, we've already said no to a whole other set of ecosystem around us. So keep in mind when it feels funny to say no, that you already know how to do it. You really do.
Agree. I think prioritizing for yourself and feeding yourself is one of the most critical things that you can do, not only for yourself and your own learning, but for your team and for your organization.
And I think that gives you the space to maintain your passion, and then the passion is the thing that you dive into when you have spare time, and then you start to learn. And there's the, you know, the virtuous cycle.
And that's good for everybody. Everybody in your life. If you have connected to that and you have passion, everyone sees that.
Yeah. So I have a question for Angela. This is about the leadership styles that you should adopt when the company is going through an agile transformation. And how do you think strategically when the whole thing is changing?
Oh, so for an Agile transformation, so I run the Agile Management Business Unit for my company, so this is something I do every day, empowerment. And that is really letting go and not telling, it is co-creating. And then the second part of your question was, so how do you keep strategic thinking? So we try to plan still on a true north. What is basically the inspiration of where we want to get to, so that we've got that North Star that's guiding us. And when we steer on a quarterly basis, we're reevaluating that connection to that true north. The cadence then is to look at true north yearly, maybe twice a year at best, and then look quarterly on the tactics that you're trying to get to achieve that. Sorry, that was sort of like a commercial for that. I really don't like it.
So this is a question for, I'm Anuradha from Veritas. So this is a question for Angela. Like you said, yeah, I mean, anybody can answer, but I am quoting you because you said there's no perfect plan. So something might go wrong. So can somebody of you share a failure story and let us know how the strategy went wrong and what was a new strategy to come over it?
Wow, so you come from Veritas. I was the chief strategy officer of Symantec. So there's something that went wrong. And it is the humility, right? That you know, things don't go perfectly, and many times you have to. I mean, you put energy and emotion behind your plans, right? Or otherwise you don't get commitment. If you don't have the energy around it, other people won't either. But there are times when you are just wrong. And you learn from that. And I call that the moment, if any of you read Brene Brown, Rising Strong, there's that face down in the arena. That's one of the best times to learn. It's that time to really for personal growth. And for me, that was a time where us failing was a tremendous personal growth to say, okay, what can I learn from this after I stop feeling so sad about it?
Mm-hmm. For me, it was, you know, I think of an incident that I had where it was, what I learned from is I owned it, right? The minute this happened and a failure on my part, I completely just I screwed up. I went to the executive and I owned it and I acknowledged it and I said, I completely screwed up. And I had the pit in my stomach like nobody's business, wanted to throw up. It's just that feeling that you get, but just I went, all right. And it helps to acknowledge and to own it. And, you know, I ended up having a great conversation with him and he's just like, okay, you know, I appreciate you acknowledging this. And it was almost to the point where I was beating myself up so much. He was like, all right, there's nothing else I can do here, so.
I think for me it was about, you know, seeing it fast and fixing it, like, you know, not dragging it on. I mean, somewhat related to what you were talking about, Bobby. And then, you know, kind of afterwards and kind of when it was fixed, to go, oh, you know, I wasn't thinking enough about what was going on for that other person. I wasn't considering, you know, what his priorities were, what his challenges were, you know, what was else was swirling around in the system. And so that was the biggest learning for me around, you know, just making sure to take time. You know, it was a reminder around, you know, unintended consequences. Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is this. There are a lot of times when you feel that there is so much more that you can do in your jobs and your roles that you're doing currently. And you try to do it in your current roles, you try to go out of the box, try to do many different things. But then there are tools, processes, systems, and people that you have to depend on. And you start feeling a little claustrophobic in your positions. But then what would be your advice to come out of those situations and try to do more maybe?
The first thing that comes to mind is always revisit the goal to simplify how you get there. Because many times we can get really overwhelmed by what's the swirl that is around us, the task lists that need to get done. And sometimes we're going to have to take some shortcuts or let something go by the wayside. But if we stay focused on what the objective is or the goal, then you can kind of reshape the way to get there. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, by the way, that gets communicated. And so it is times that you actually have to calm yourself and bring yourself back to a center and focus that says, I know what we're trying to achieve. Maybe take myself off the playing field so I don't transfer that anxiety to my team, and then come back and regroup and go forward to bring people. And you were mentioning about, if you can be clear and crisp on the communication, oftentimes you'll find that actually a lot of people around you are also overwhelmed and thankful that you're simplifying it for them.
So my question was more from an upward leadership perspective.
So I'll leave it to the smarter people here to my right.
Joe?
Not entirely sure what you're getting at, but let me have a go. I think, trying to be everything to everyone and taking a kind of almost a perfectionist approach is very self-defeating. And I like the mantra that sometimes 80% is good enough. You can, particularly if you deliver it on time or you surprise and delight by delivering it ahead of time. So better to be 80% good enough on time than 120% angsting after perfection and taking too long and disappointing people who had other expectations.
Yeah, I find that in those moments, there's a few things I do. One is I'll kind of chunk up the work in my head, right, and kind of segment it, and it makes it a little more palatable to go and attack the work. But the one thing that I find is helpful is don't be afraid to ask for help. You don't have to do everything. And there's this sense that you have to, and you're the one who is responsible and you have to do it all, but don't be afraid to ask for help. And that includes asking for help from your peers, your team that you lead, and your executives. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's innate in us that we feel like we have to fix everything, and you don't. So that's the advice I'd give to everybody.
So thank you, Joe. I mean, I know her from my past life. I've not met you, but it was brilliant listening to you, Bobby. And Angela, you were brilliant as always.
Go do so. She got me